My name is Paula Mills, and I was 32 the night my father decided to say, out loud and without hesitation, what my family had believed about me for years. At dinner, my dad didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam the table or create the kind of scene people remember forever. That would have been easier somehow, easier to point to, easier to fight back against. Instead, he looked at my younger sister and said it like he was commenting on the weather. Sophie is the real success of this family. For one strange second, I honestly thought I had heard him wrong. The room didn't freeze dramatically. No one gasped. No fork clattered to the floor. It just went quiet in that heavy, uncomfortable way a room does when everyone hears something cruel and chooses, almost instinctively, not to challenge it. My mother gave a small nod, calm and effortless, as if she were only confirming what had always been obvious. "Of course she is," she said softly. "She takes risks. She doesn't play it safe." I was still holding my fork in midair. I had come straight from work, still carrying the ache of a long day in my shoulders, still thinking about the emails I'd have to answer in the morning. I paid my own bills. I covered my own life. I never called asking for money, never showed up with another emergency, never expected anyone to drop everything for me. I had spent years making sure my life did not become someone else's burden. But Sophie had just started another business idea, her third in 2 years. The first two had burned out almost as fast as they started. This newest one hadn't made anything yet, not really, but somehow she was the success, and I was the cautionary tale. My father finally looked at me then, not angry, not emotional, just certain. "You've always been too comfortable," he said. "No real ambition, no vision." It didn't sound like an opinion. It sounded like a verdict he had reached long before that night. No one tried to soften it. Not my mother, not Sophie. My boyfriend Daniel had stayed home that evening because I told him it was just dinner with my parents and sister, nothing important. I remember thinking, with a kind of bitter irony, that maybe it was better he wasn't there to watch me get quietly reduced to a function. Sophie didn't defend me. She didn't even look embarrassed. She kept her eyes on her plate, almost expressionless, like this was uncomfortable. Sure, but not surprising. Like this was simply the way the world arranged itself around her. And maybe it was. Because as I sat there, something settled inside me. Not rage, not heartbreak. Something colder than both. Clarity. I thought about every late night I worked because stability mattered. Every time I transferred money without mentioning it to anyone else. Every crisis I stepped into because if I didn't, things would get worse. I thought about how many times I had cleaned up damage that wasn't mine and how none of it had ever earned me respect. In my family, being responsible didn't make you precious. It made you available. I could have said something. I could have reminded them who got the phone call every time Sophie's plans collapsed. I could have listed the rent payments, the loans, the calm rescue operations disguised as family support. I could have told them exactly how much their so-called success had cost me. Instead, I lowered my fork, nodded once, and said, "Okay." Then I kept eating. Because in that moment, I realized something that changed everything. They weren't failing to understand me. They understood me perfectly. They were simply choosing her. They were choosing spectacle over steadiness, potential over proof, noise over reliability. And for the first time in my life, I stopped trying to earn a place I had already paid for too many times. That dinner didn't come out of nowhere. It only said plainly what my family had been living by for years. Growing up, Sophie was never the problem, even when she clearly was. If she got into trouble at school, my parents said she was spirited, not difficult. If she quit a job after 3 weeks, they said she wasn't meant to be stuck in ordinary places. If she lost money on another impulsive idea, they called it a learning experience, the price of being bold. Everything about her was framed as promise. Everything about me was framed as obligation. If I got good grades, that was expected. If I worked hard, that was normal. If I handled things quietly and without complaint, that was simply who I was. No celebration, no admiration, just a silent family agreement that I would be the one to keep things from falling apart. Over time, that expectation became heavier than I wanted to admit. When Sophie's first business failed, my parents asked if I could help her get back on her feet. When the second collapsed, they insisted she just needed one more chance. When she borrowed money from people she couldn't repay, my parents didn't confront her. They called me. Not because I was older, not because I was wealthy, but because I was predictable. Because I would say yes, and I did. again and again, in amounts small enough to excuse and large enough to matter. I told myself it was what family did. I told myself love sometimes looked like absorbing damage so the people you care about can breathe. But slowly, quietly, something started to rot underneath that logic. No matter how much I gave, Sophie didn't become more careful. My parents didn't become more grateful. And I didn't become more loved. I became more expected. That was the cruelest part of it. Not the money, not even the exhaustion. The language, the way they described both of us. She was brave for taking risks. I was safe for holding everything together. They admired the person who made the mess and leaned harder on the one who cleaned it up. So when my father said Sophie was the real success of the family, it didn't feel new. It felt official, like they had finally stopped pretending I wasn't supposed to notice. After that dinner, nothing exploded. There was no scene, no phone call where I announced I was done, no spectacular break that could later be used against me. On the surface, everything still looked the same. I went to work, I answered messages, I showed up where I had to. But underneath all of that, something fundamental had moved. I stopped reaching out first. I stopped offering help before anyone asked. And when they did ask, I didn't rush in. The first time it happened, it felt unnatural. My mother called one evening, her tone so casual it almost sounded rehearsed. "Sophie's a little short this month," she said, "just until things pick up." Then she paused, waiting for me to step into the silence the way I always had. This time I didn't. "I can't help this time," I said. The quiet on the other end wasn't angry. Not yet. It was confused, as if I had violated a rule that existed without ever being spoken aloud. After that, the calls kept coming. But something in the tone changed. Less warmth, more assumption. My father started speaking to me differently too. Shorter, flatter, colder in small ways that were hard to name and impossible not to feel. Not openly upset, just disappointed, as though I had quietly failed at a responsibility no one had officially assigned me. Sophie didn't even bother pretending to be gracious. Her text went from casual to annoyed almost immediately. "Are you seriously saying no? It's not even that much. You know I'll pay you back." That last line almost made me laugh. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just stopped engaging. And for the first time in years, I felt something I barely recognized. Space. Not peace, not at first. Space. A widening distance between who they thought I was and who I was beginning to become without their demands pressing against my throat. But distance has consequences. The family group chat got quieter whenever I replied. Invitations started coming late, or not at all. Updates about Sophie's life traveled in circles that somehow no longer included me. I wasn't being thrown out in any obvious way. I was simply no longer necessary. And that realization hurt more than what my father had said at dinner, because it revealed the entire structure beneath it. I had not been included because I was cherished. I had been included because I was useful. For a while, I questioned myself. Late at night, usually. I wondered if I was becoming selfish. I wondered if silence was just another kind of cruelty. I wondered whether I should go back to being who they wanted, just to make everything feel smooth again. It would have been easier. It always had been. But every time I let that thought drift too far, I saw my father's face at the dinner table. Calm, certain. She's the real success. And I realized if I went back, nothing would change. They would not suddenly respect me. They would not become fair. They would not see my worth because I had once again rescued them from the consequences of their own choices. They would only become comfortable. So I stayed quiet. And for the first time, I let silence do what loyalty never had. Time didn't fix anything. It just gave me distance. At first, that distance felt unfamiliar, like I had stepped out of a role I didn't know how to replace. My phone stopped lighting up at odd hours. No more rushed calls. No more just this once emergencies that somehow repeated themselves every few weeks. The silence was uncomfortable in the beginning. Then slowly, almost quietly, it started to feel useful. I began putting that same energy back into my own life. Not dramatically. Not in a way anyone would notice right away. Just small, consistent changes. I stayed a little later at work, not because I had to, but because I finally could. I took on projects I used to avoid because I was always too distracted, fixing something at home. I signed up for certifications I had been putting off for years, telling myself I didn't have the time. It turned out I always had the time. I had just been giving it away. I started saving properly, not leftover money, real savings, planned, intentional, the kind that grows quietly in the background without anyone applauding it. I moved into a better apartment, Nothing flashy, just clean, quiet, and mine. No one helped me with it. No one needed to. And that was the point. My days became structured, predictable in a way that felt grounding instead of limiting. Work, rest, small routines that built something steady underneath me. No chaos, no urgency, no expectation waiting for me to step in and fix what wasn't mine. And somewhere in that stillness, something shifted inside me. I stopped rehearsing conversations in my head, stopped imagining how I would explain my choices if someone questioned them, stopped waiting for approval that had never really existed. That pressure just disappeared. We still spoke occasionally. Short calls, basic updates. My mom would ask how work was going, her tone lighter, but careful now, like she was stepping around something invisible. My dad kept things brief. No advice, no commentary, no quiet judgments disguised as concern. Sophie stayed mostly silent. No more casual messages, no more assumptions that I would respond. No one asked for money anymore. But there was something underneath those conversations, a distance they didn't know how to cross. And I didn't feel the need to close it. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't playing a role in my family. I wasn't the backup plan. I wasn't the solution waiting to be called. I was just living, quietly, consistently. And without announcing it to anyone, I had already started becoming everything they once said I wasn't. They just didn't know it yet. The call came late. Not urgent enough for panic, but serious enough that I knew it mattered. It was my dad. He didn't usually call first. "Are you busy?" he asked. I glanced around my apartment. Everything was in its place. Quiet, controlled, mine. "No," I said. "What's going on?" There was a pause. Not long, but different. "Your sister is dealing with some things," he said carefully. "We need to talk about it. Come by tomorrow." We. Not Sophie. Not him. We. I already knew what that meant. The next evening, I walked into the same dining room where everything had shifted months ago. Same table, same chairs, but the energy was different now. Heavier, less certain. Sophie looked tired. Not dramatic, not the kind of exhaustion you can fix with one good night's sleep. This was deeper, the kind that builds over time when things stop working and there's no one left to absorb the fallout. My mom avoided eye contact at first. My dad stayed standing a little longer than usual, like he needed an extra second to steady himself before sitting down. No one rushed to speak. Eventually, my dad did. "Sophie got into a situation with her business," he said. "Some money is tied up. There are people waiting to be paid." I nodded slightly, calm, listening. "We've helped where we can," my mom added quickly, "but it's not enough this time." Another pause. Then my dad looked directly at me. "We thought maybe you could step in," he said, "just to stabilize things until she recovers." There it was. No apology, no acknowledgement, no reflection on anything that had happened before, just the same expectation, delivered more carefully this time. I leaned back slightly in my chair. Not defensive, not emotional, just steady. "For how long?" I asked. My dad hesitated. "Until things settle." I nodded once, then turned my head toward Sophie. "For how long do you think it'll take?" I asked her. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Because for the first time, confidence wasn't enough to fill the space where accountability should have been. I looked back at my dad. "You said something at dinner a few months ago," I said. The room went still. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rush the words. I just let them settle, the same way his had. "You said Sophie was the real success of this family." My mom shifted in her seat. My dad's expression tightened just slightly. "I believed you," I continued, so I stepped back. Silence. I stopped interfering. I stopped fixing things. I let her handle her own path, the way successful people are supposed to. Sophie looked down at the table. My dad opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing to argue with. No accusation in my tone. No anger to push against. Just a reflection of what he had already decided. "I'm not stepping in this time," I said. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They were final. My mom exhaled slowly. My dad looked away. Sophie didn't move. And for the first time, the responsibility stayed exactly where it belonged. Not passed. Not softened. Not reassigned. No one stopped me when I stood up. No one followed me to the door. There was no dramatic ending. No raised voices echoing behind me. I left the same way I had come in. Quietly. But something had changed in that room. Not in me. In them. For the first time, there was no plan that included me fixing things. No unspoken expectation waiting for me to step back into the role they had built around me. Just a situation they had to sit with on their own. The calls didn't stop completely after that, but they changed. My mom would check in sometimes, her voice softer now, more careful, like she was choosing her words instead of assuming them. My dad kept things short. No pressure, no subtle reminders of what family was supposed to mean. Sophie didn't call at all, and that silence said more than anything she could have said. Weeks passed, then months. Life moved the way it does when no one is constantly interrupting it. Steady, quiet, mine. One evening, my mom called again. This time, she didn't ask for anything. She just said, "We didn't realize how much you were carrying." I didn't answer right away. Not because I was angry, because I didn't know what that sentence was supposed to fix. After a moment, I said, "It's okay." And I meant it, not in a forgiving way, in a finished way. A few days later, my dad sent a message. Short, simple, "We're proud of you." I read it once. Then I put my phone down. Not because it didn't matter, but because it didn't change anything. Their words had finally caught up to the truth, just not in time to shape it. They didn't lose me in one moment. They lost access to me slowly, every time they chose not to see me, and by the time they finally did, I had already learned how to live without being recognized for it. They called her the success while I was still there. They called me one after I stopped needing them to.